They thought I was weak, so they destroyed my life. They fired me, humiliated me, erased my name. But they made one mistake. They didn't check what I saved. Now I'm not surviving anymore. I'm striking back. The city never truly slept, but there were parts of it that felt abandoned even in daylight. That was where I lived. A narrow apartment tucked between two aging buildings, where the paint peeled like old memories, and the air always carried the faint smell of rusted pipes and wet cement. From my window, I could see flickering neon signs that never fully worked, like they were trying and failing to be alive. People thought I was invisible. Maybe I was. But invisibility is a weapon when you know how to use it. I wasn't always like this. There was a time when I believed in people too easily, when I trusted smiles, promises, and handshakes. That version of me died slowly, first through betrayal at work, then by friends who sold my name like it meant nothing, and finally by the people who tried to erase my reputation completely. They didn't just want me gone. They wanted me to disappear as if I never existed. And that was their first mistake. It started at ArcLight Corporation, the place where I worked for 7 years. A glass tower that looked beautiful from the outside, but felt like a cage once you stepped inside. Cold lighting. Colder people. Everyone smiling with teeth sharpened by ambition. My manager, Daniel Cross, was the kind of man who spoke softly but destroyed loudly. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. He just made decisions that crushed people's lives like they were numbers on a screen. And I was one of those numbers. One morning, I was called into a meeting room that smelled like polished wood and corporate perfume. 3 executives sat across from me. No eye contact. No warmth. Just judgment. "We've decided to terminate your position," Daniel said, sliding a folder toward me. No explanation. No warning. Just a neatly printed lie about performance issues. But I knew the truth. I had found something. Something I wasn't supposed to see. Financial irregularities. Hidden transfers. Names buried in spreadsheets that didn't match the official reports. I didn't confront them. I didn't even speak about it. I just kept it. And that silence terrified them more than words ever could. So they removed me. Escorted me out like a problem that had finally been solved. That day, standing outside the glass tower, I remember the wind hitting my face differently. Not cold, but awake. Because something inside me shifted. Not broken. Rebuilt. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I didn't beg for justice. I opened my laptop, and I started watching everything. Patterns. Names. Connections. The way people moved money. The way they lied in emails. The way they thought deleting a file meant deleting truth. They had erased me from their system. But they forgot something important. I was never part of their system to begin with. And now, I was going to learn how to destroy it. The first few nights after I lost my job felt strangely quiet, like the world had muted itself just so I could hear my own thoughts more clearly. My apartment became both a shelter and a command center. The flickering neon outside kept time for me, and the hum of old electricity in the walls became the soundtrack of everything I was about to do. I didn't rush anything. Revenge, I quickly learned, is not built in anger. It is built in patience. On my desk, I spread out everything I had collected, screenshots, financial logs, internal emails I had quietly saved over months without anyone noticing. At ArcLight Corporation, they assumed trust was ignorance. They never imagined it could be preparation. Daniel Cross had called me replaceable. But replaceable things don't remember everything. I did. Every meeting. Every file. Every contradiction hidden inside polished reports. I began mapping it all like a spider weaving a web in reverse, starting from the center of corruption and tracing outward until every thread led somewhere uncomfortable. The city outside kept moving as if nothing had changed. Cars honked. Vendors shouted. Life continued with its usual indifference. But inside me, something precise was forming. Not rage. Structure. I created a second identity, carefully, quietly. Not fake in the dramatic sense, but clean. Untraceable. A digital ghost with no past attached to ArcLight, no emotional history, no footprint that could lead back to me. Every move I made had to feel like it came from nowhere. Because Daniel didn't fear enemies. He feared evidence. And evidence was what I was about to build. It started with small things. I reached out anonymously to a former accountant who had been quietly pushed out of the company a year before me. He was cautious at first, defensive even. People like him learn early that truth has a price. But I didn't ask for trust. I asked for patterns. And patterns are harder to refuse than requests. I don't want your story, I told him in a message. I want your numbers. There was a long silence. Then, slowly, he responded. What he sent didn't shock me, but it confirmed everything. ArcLight wasn't just hiding mistakes. It was recycling them, moving money through subsidiaries that didn't officially exist on paper. Small leaks that became rivers when connected. And Daniel Cross was at the center of it, still smiling in board meetings, still shaking hands like a man who believed himself untouchable. But I was no longer watching him as a victim. I was studying him like a system. At night, I would sit by the window, the glow of my laptop reflecting in the glass, and imagine the moment everything would begin to collapse. Not loudly, not immediately, but quietly, like a structure losing its balance, one invisible crack at a time. The most dangerous part wasn't the planning. It was the calm. Because I started to realize something unsettling about myself. I wasn't just seeking justice anymore. I was enjoying the precision. And that scared me more than anything Daniel Cross had ever done. Still, I didn't stop. I couldn't. Because somewhere between betrayal and silence, I had already crossed a line I could never step back from. And on the other side of that line was the beginning of their downfall. By the time the third week began, I had stopped thinking of ArcLight Corporation as a workplace. It was a machine. And machines, no matter how polished, always have weak points. My days followed a quiet rhythm now. Coffee gone cold beside the laptop, curtains half drawn so the city light didn't fully reach me. I slept in fragments, not because I was restless, but because my mind refused to pause what it was building. The anonymous accountant had become my first real thread into the system. But one thread is never enough. You don't topple a structure by pulling, you unravel it. Slowly, precisely, I began feeding small pieces of information into places where they would be noticed, but not traced. A hint here, a document fragment there. Never enough to accuse, only enough to question. And questions are dangerous inside corporations like ArcLight. The first reaction came exactly as I expected. Confusion, then denial, then panic disguised as internal review. I watched it unfold from the outside like someone observing a storm forming far beyond the horizon. Emails started circulating internally about data inconsistencies. Meetings were suddenly held behind closed doors. Passwords were reset. Access logs were checked. They didn't know what they were looking for, but they knew something was wrong. And that uncertainty was my opening. One afternoon, while scrolling through secured forums I had quietly infiltrated using my secondary identity, I noticed something unexpected. A message thread from within ArcLight's internal communication network. Someone was asking questions. Too specific to be random. Too cautious to be leadership. Someone inside was starting to notice patterns too. A name appeared repeatedly in indirect references. Mira Hensley. A mid-level compliance officer. Quiet. Observant. The type of person who doesn't speak often in meetings, but remembers everything said in them. Most people overlook individuals like her. That's why they survive. I watched her digital footprint carefully for days. She wasn't investigating loudly. She was doing something far more dangerous, connecting inconsistencies without telling anyone, cross-checking internal reports against public filings, noticing timing gaps in transactions that didn't align with ArcLight's official explanations. She wasn't chasing corruption yet, but she was standing at its edge, and that made her unpredictable. One night, I decided to test the system further. I sent a single, carefully constructed packet of data into a forgotten internal archive, something small enough to be dismissed if found alone, but impossible to ignore if connected with what she already suspected. Then I waited. The next morning, ArcLight changed its tone. Not publicly, not officially, but internally. Security protocols increased. Internal audits were escalated. Certain employees were quietly reassigned. And Daniel Cross, he stopped smiling in meetings. For the first time since this began, I felt something shift that wasn't just inside me, but inside them. They were no longer comfortable. They were alert, and alert systems make mistakes. That evening, I sat by the window again, watching the city lights flicker like distant signals from another world. I could feel it now, the system tightening, reacting, searching. They were beginning to sense the presence of something they couldn't locate. Not a person, not a file, A disruption. And somewhere inside Arclight, Mira Hensley had started digging deeper. Without knowing it, she had just stepped onto the same path I was building. And from that moment forward, nothing would stay hidden for long. Arclight Corporation no longer felt like a tower of glass and ambition. It felt like a locked room with no visible exit, just tighter walls every passing day. Inside, fear doesn't look like panic. It looks like silence. Meetings that used to be filled with confident voices were now measured, careful, rehearsed. People stopped laughing in hallways. Even the elevators felt different, too quiet, too aware, as if they were carrying secrets between floors. And at the center of it all was Daniel Cross. He didn't speak much anymore. But when he did, people listened like they were standing on fragile ground. I could feel the system reacting to me now. Not directly, not openly, but like a body detecting a foreign element in its bloodstream. Every move I made through my anonymous identity was being countered faster than before. Logs were wiped quicker. Internal filters tightened. Access routes that used to be open suddenly became restricted. They were learning. But learning takes time. And I had already used mine well. Then came Mira Hensley's turning point. It happened in the quietest way possible. Late evening. Her office lights, still on long after most employees had left. The building outside her glass window glowed with distant traffic, but inside her desk, something far more dangerous was forming, understanding. She had started to see it, not just irregular transactions, not just mismatched reports, but a pattern that didn't belong to error. It belonged to intent. Her fingers paused over her keyboard as she opened a file that shouldn't have existed in her clearance level. It wasn't fully complete, just fragments, traces, echoes of hidden financial movement. But it was enough. Enough to change her breathing. Enough to make her sit back slowly in her chair, like the room had shifted slightly beneath her. "This isn't accounting mistakes," she whispered to herself. Her voice barely carried in the empty office. "This is organized." And once that thought formed, it didn't leave her alone. She began digging deeper, quietly, carefully, avoiding alerts. But the deeper she went, the more unstable the structure became. Every layer she uncovered didn't answer questions. It multiplied them. That's when she found something that made her stop completely. A repeated digital signature. Not a name. Not a person. A pattern. A ghost-like presence moving through archive systems, leaving behind perfectly minimal traces, too precise to be accidental, too controlled to be random. She didn't know who it was, but she felt it. Someone else was inside the system with her. And they weren't on Arclight's side. Meanwhile, Daniel Cross was starting to lose patience. The board demanded answers. Investors asked for explanations. Internal trust was eroding faster than anyone wanted to admit. Daniel's usual calm authority was still there, but now it had cracks in it, visible only to those who knew how to look. He called for a closed investigation team. "Find the source," he said coldly. "I don't care what it costs." That was the moment Arclight stopped being a company trying to fix a problem and became a machine trying to find a target. But the problem with hunting something invisible is simple. You start assuming shadows are threats. And in that confusion, mistakes multiply. That night, I watched everything unfold from my side of the world. The alerts, the internal shifts, the tightening digital walls. They thought they were closing in, but they were actually spreading themselves thin. Because now there were two forces inside Arclight's collapse. Mira, chasing truth. Daniel, chasing control. And neither of them realized yet. They were both moving exactly where I needed them to be. For the first time since this began, I leaned back in my chair and allowed myself something rare. A slow breath. Not relief. Not victory. Just recognition. The system wasn't resisting anymore. It was reacting. And reaction is always the first step toward collapse. By the time Arclight Corporation realized it wasn't dealing with a normal internal issue anymore, it was already too late to stop what had been set in motion. The cracks had turned into fractures, and fractures don't ask permission before they spread. The morning it finally broke open, the city looked the same from my window. Same noise, same movement, same indifferent rhythm of life continuing as if nothing beneath it was shifting. But inside Arclight's glass tower, something irreversible was happening. Mira Hensley had done it. She didn't mean to ignite everything. She only wanted truth. But truth, once fully uncovered, never stays contained. She compiled everything, Financial trails, internal communications, hidden transfers, anonymized access logs, and cross-linked it into a single report. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't dramatic. It was clean. And that made it more dangerous. Because clean truth is harder to dismiss. At 9:14 a.m., the report reached internal compliance escalation. By 9:47, it reached the board. By 10:03, Daniel Cross was called into an emergency session. I wasn't inside the building, but I didn't need to be. I could feel the shift through the system like a pulse-changing rhythm. Access requests spiked. Accounts locked. Emergency protocols activated. And then silence. Not calm silence. The kind that comes right before impact. Mira sat alone in her office as alerts started appearing on her screen. Security access warnings, audit flags, system lockdown notices. Her breathing became uneven as she realized something that wasn't in her report. Someone had been watching her too. Not just the company. Not just Daniel. Something deeper. Her cursor hovered over the final file she had sent. For the first time, doubt entered her eyes. "Who else knows this?" she whispered. But there was no answer in the system. Only reaction. Inside the boardroom, Daniel Cross finally lost control of the narrative he had spent years building. Screens displayed transaction breakdowns, offshore accounts, and traceable inconsistencies that could no longer be buried. The more he spoke, the less anyone listened. Because numbers don't argue. They expose. And then it happened. A final packet of data, anonymous, precise, undeniable, was injected into the live internal system. Not destructive. Not loud. Just complete. Every hidden thread ArcLight had buried over the years was suddenly visible in one unified structure. It wasn't an attack. It was a revelation. Daniel turned to the security team. "Trace it. Now." But there was nothing to trace anymore. Because the system wasn't being hacked in real time. It had already been mapped. Already been studied. Already been understood. And that's when I finally stepped forward, digitally, not physically. My identity wasn't revealed in a dramatic explosion or a public announcement. It surfaced in the only place that mattered, inside their own network logs. A single identifier, a presence they had seen patterns of but never a face. Mira froze when she saw it. The same ghost signature, now attached to a final message. You were never broken by them. You were just placed in the wrong system. Daniel's face turned pale as realization hit, not just that he had been exposed, but that the exposure had never been reactive. It had been constructed, step by step, thread by thread, for months, maybe longer. The collapse wasn't sudden. It was designed. Police notifications triggered. Financial regulators flagged. External auditors locked in. The tower that once felt untouchable was now surrounded, not by force, but by evidence. And no amount of authority can fight documentation. In the final moments, as chaos spread through ArcLight's upper floors, Mira stood in her office, staring at the screen. She didn't know who I was. Not fully, but she understood something deeper now. This wasn't just corruption being exposed. It was someone rebuilding control over a system that had tried to erase them. Daniel Cross was escorted out later that day, his power reduced to nothing more than explanations no one wanted to hear. The empire he built didn't explode. It dissolved, piece by piece, under the weight of its own hidden truth. And me, I didn't celebrate. I didn't announce victory. I simply logged out. Because revenge was never the goal. Control was. Not over people. Over systems that once thought I didn't matter. That night, the city outside my window looked the same again. But I wasn't the same person who had started this. They tried to break me. They tried to erase me. Instead, they taught me how to disappear properly and reappear only when it mattered. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't surviving anymore. I was choosing.